Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 815, and today is June 27th, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. We got a lot of news to wrap up the week here, so I want to jump right into it. Just want to remind people to share the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute, reposted on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee for the video version of the show. It's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts, and follow me on Twitter. The handle is at @KyleAnzalone_. Additionally, I'm the host of the Kyle Anzalone Show. This past week, I had a great group of guests, as well as did some breaking news episodes of that program. So be sure you're subscribed at the Kyle Anzalone Show. It's the first link in the show notes page to get all of that content. I had Scott Horton on this past week. We had a really great conversation. And then next week, James Carden returns to the show, as well as I have Connor O'Keefe coming on. And I have more guests to book still. So let's just jump right into the news that we have today. This first story is some good news. Senator Mike Lee introduces bill to remove the U.S. from NATO. And you can see the tweet here that he recently put out. It's time to leave NATO. So, Senator Mike Lee introduced a bill to remove the U.S. from the North Atlantic Alliance, arguing that the Collective Defense Pact is not within the U.S. national security interest. The legislation, titled Not a Trusted Organization Act, or the NATO Act, argues NATO expansion led to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The bill states the dissolution of both the Warsaw Pact and Soviet Union fundamentally altered the security environment in Europe and rendered NATO's founding collective defense mission irrelevant. Despite its waning relevance and prior assurances to the country, NATO began a profound eastward expansion in 1999, which as of 2025 culminated in a land border with the Russian Federation that exceeds 1,500 miles and encircles the Baltic Sea. The invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation in 2022 demonstrates the Russian Federation's willingness to employ military action in response to perceived security threats. In 2007, this is back to the article, Russian President Vladimir Putin warned that Ukraine's ascension into NATO would be a major national security risk for Moscow. Over the next decade and a half, the bloc would increasingly treat Kiev as a member, even if it would not grant Ukraine official membership in the alliance. In 2021, the Kremlin sent a proposal to the White House that would have averted the war if NATO agreed that NATO would not become a member. However, the Biden administration never seriously considered the offer, and NATO continued to express that the door to membership was open to Kiev. In addition to starting a major war in Europe, Lee says membership in NATO is causing the U.S. to pay for Europe's defense. The bill explains, since the founding of NATO, the United States has shouldered the burden of what was characterized as a collective security alliance. As the largest financial and hard power contributor, the bill explains that the U.S. is paying for everything. President Donald Trump is attempting to address the issue by mandating that all alliance members spend 5% of GDP on defense. However, Lee notes in the bill that nearly one-third of the bloc does not currently meet the 2% minimum, and by that way, that minimum was bumped up at the NATO summit to 5%, just as the same time as Lee was introducing this bill. Lee argues that the current issues of the alliance creates a situation where membership of the United States in NATO is inconsistent with the national security interests of the United States, and it's rare, but I couldn't agree with the senator more. And as I'll point out in my Libertarian Institute debrief that will be out later today, this bill probably could have been written by the great Scott Horton. It seems that maybe somebody in Lee's office actually read Provoked. So, a couple notes from the NATO summit that just happened. This one from Dave DeCamp. NATO summit declaration makes no mention of Ukrainian membership. So this is a step in the right direction. This is a step in the direction that will allow the war in Ukraine to end. And additionally, this article that I wrote for the Institute, NATO agrees to double minimum defense spending level to 5% of GDP. And the statement released by the bloc following the summit explains that the new policy will call for allies to spend 3.5% of GDP on traditional defense and 1% 3.5% on a nation's critical infrastructure to reach the target 5%. And so I think what they're basically concluding here is that if we're going to seriously fight a war with Russia, we're going to need lots of highways to be used as runways, lots of railways to move the military equipment around. And so if you're spending 3.5% of your GDP on defense, tanks, military hardware, equipment, things like that, then you could spend 1.5% on building the infrastructure to move that around in the event of a war. And also for the countries involved, I think this was a little bit of an easier pill to swallow, since a 5% of GDP would force some countries to increase their defense budget by over 3 times what the current budget is. That this way it's only like forcing them to double their current budget. Now, the statement says allies agree that 5% commitment will compromise 2 essential categories, and allies agree to submit annual plans showing a credible incremental path to reach this goal, and they're supposed to hit the level by 2025. This somewhat seems unlikely to actually be met, though. See, the current requirement was previously 2%, and only 23 of 32 members met that requirement. Spain and Italy will only hit that level for the first time this year, and Canada is not expected to spend more than 2% of its GDP on defense until 2027. According to NATO statistics, in 2024, only Poland spent 4% of its GDP on military forces and would be the only country that meets the current minimum. 4 countries, including the United States, spend over 3% of GDP on defense. But to even get to the 3.5% level, the U.S. will have to tick up its defense spending on GDP by quite a bit. And of course, if we want to go to 5%, that would be $1.5 trillion annually on the war budget. I think this is overall just seen as a way for NATO to try to appease Donald Trump. Next article here, UK will send Ukraine nearly $100 million in missiles paid for with seized Russian assets. So the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced a new military package for Ukraine that will be paid for using interest generated from frozen Russian assets. London plans to send 350 air defense missiles to Kiev worth just under $100 million. So speaking at the annual NATO summit, Starmer said, Russia, not Ukraine, should pay the price for Putin's barbaric and illegal war. It's not only right we use seized Russian assets to strengthen Ukraine's air defenses. The security of Ukraine is vital to our own. The package of 350 interceptors for the UK's Raven system will use 70 million pounds of interest generated from frozen Russian assets. Following the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the U.S. and its allies seized over $200 billion in Russian assets. Western countries are now using interest generated from frozen assets, as well as some of Russia's original money, to pay for the arms sent to Ukraine. The Raven system is a retrofitted air defense system that London developed for Ukraine by repurposing air-to-air missiles to become interceptors. Ukraine will soon have 13 Raven launchers. Earlier this year, Denmark announced it would use $300 million in Russian interest to build arms production in Ukraine. Last year, Russian President Vladimir Putin denounced the Western attempts to use the frozen Russian funds as theft. And as I've been arguing on this show, the real issue for me here is it's going to make it far more difficult to unwind the war when Russia is saying that, okay, now that Ukraine is suing for peace, now we want our money back. We want the sanctions lifted. We want our frozen assets returned, as well as the interest generated off of those assets. And of course, Western governments are not going to want to go to their people and either have to take money out of the treasury or raise taxes to pay back the Russians. And so my guess is ultimately the Ukrainians pay the price for this, as Russia will say, okay, we'll just seize more Ukrainian territory and then, repay ourselves with the missiles and etc. here. All right, this next article I have for antiwar.com, I wrote just this morning. Absolutely massive story out of Haaretz. Israeli soldiers ordered to fire on aid seekers in Gaza. This article from Haaretz was absolutely brutal. It really upset me reading it and hearing what is going on. And then, of course, there are some more details and context that I wanted to add, so I wrote this up for antiwar.com. Israeli soldiers speaking with Haaretz say they received orders to fire on desperate Palestinians attempting to reach aid distribution sites in Gaza. Over 550 Palestinians have been killed trying to get aid in the past month. Israeli soldiers in Gaza told Haaretz that the army has deliberately fired at Palestinians near aid distribution sites. The outlet explains conversations with officers and soldiers reveal that commanders ordered troops to shoot at crowds to drive them away or disperse them, even though it was clear they posed no threat. Earlier this week, the Gaza media office reported that 449 Palestinians have been killed and over 4,000 injured since Israel restarted aid distribution near the end of May. The IDF has even fired on Palestinians waiting to receive aid with drones and tanks. One soldier explained to Haaretz it's a killing field. They added that Israeli soldiers fired at Palestinians even though the aid seekers did not present a threat. An officer told the outlet it's neither ethnically nor morally acceptable for people to have to reach or fail to reach a humanitarian zone under tank fire, snipers, and mortar shells. And that's one of the things that they talked about a lot in the article, that they're even using mortars and artillery rounds to fire at the Palestinians. So a doctor in Gaza speaking to NBC News said the aid sites in Gaza, it's a death trap, it's a slaughterhouse. They report receiving dozens of patients daily who are wounded near the aid sites. Haaretz reports that Israeli forces opened fire at Palestinians near aid sites at least 19 times over the past month. Soldiers said some Palestinian militants backed by Tel Aviv have also fired on civilians, including the ISIS-linked Abu Shabab, which Israel has been backing and helping to loot some aid sites as well. On Thursday, at least 18 Palestinians were killed by an Israeli airstrike while attempting to receive aid that Gaza police had recovered from looters. And so this was aid that was actually not being distributed at a GHF site, a Gaza Humanitarian Foundation site. And so one soldier explained to Haaretz, it's a killing field. They added that the soldiers fired at Palestinians even though the aid seekers did not present a threat. An officer told the outlet it's neither ethnically nor morally acceptable for people to have reached or failed to reach a humanitarian zone under tank fire, snipers, and mortar shells. A doctor in Gaza speaking with NBC News about the aid sites in Gaza said it's a death trap, it's a slaughterhouse. They report receiving dozens of patients daily who are wounded near the aid sites. Haaretz reports that Israeli forces opened fire at Palestinians near aid sites at least 19 times over the past month. Soldiers said some Palestinian militias backed by Tel Aviv have also fired on civilians, including the ISIS-linked Abu Shabab. On Thursday, at least 18 Palestinians were killed by an Israeli airstrike while attempting to receive aid that the Gaza police have recovered from looters. At the beginning of March, Tel Aviv broke a ceasefire and hostage exchange deal with Hamas by cutting off all aid entering the Strip. Near the end of May, Israel began allowing the U.S.-based Gaza Humanitarian Foundation to distribute a limited amount of aid in Gaza. And now I think one of the things that this Haaretz article doesn't explicitly say, but adds a lot of evidence to the claim, that what Israel is trying to do in Gaza right now is essentially provoke the downfall, the collapse of the Palestinian society there. So if you have an area where people are starving under famine, aid groups typically wait until they have not like a massive stockpile of aid. They're not like letting people starve, but they wait until they could flood the area with humanitarian aid. They keep sites open. They make it very accessible. The reason for this is because you end up with stampedes and mobs, looting, people fighting each other over the food. If you know, let's say you have 10,000 people who are starving, the number in Gaza is far higher, but if you had 10,000 people starving and only have food aid for 100 people, then it creates a lot of chaos. And so the GHF is operating in Gaza, intentionally meant to create the situations for the Israeli soldiers to fire on the Palestinians. They don't announce when the aid sites are going to be open. They only keep the aid sites open an hour a day. And so this causes everybody to try to get there at one time. People go early, you know, they line up and wait in line, because if you know there's more products than demand, the first people are going to get them. And so Israel is intentionally creating this chaotic situation to give Israeli soldiers an excuse to open fire on the Palestinians. And this GHF, which is run by a Christian Zionist here in the U.S. who apparently has strong relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu, that's Reverend Johnny Moore, right? And so this guy is clearly, if not maybe a useful idiot of Benjamin Netanyahu, but maybe he's intentionally going along with this ethnic cleansing campaign. The U.S. State Department is now involved in this directly, sending $30 million to the GHF. Now, earlier this month, there was a report that the U.S. was going to send $500 million to the organization, allowing it to operate for 6 months. And I reached out to the State Department, and they had said that they didn't have any updates on that at the time. So I would guess there's going to be more money flowing from the U.S. to the GHF soon. The situation in Gaza is getting very bleak. When you talk about why people are lining up hours beforehand to get food, human rights groups have warned that the GHF's distribution plans would be insufficient. Over the past week, children have died of deprivation. On Thursday, 2 infants at the Al Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis died due to a lack of formula. So this is all absolutely horrific. And it's worth pointing out here, the Al Mayadeen, the ship that Gerda Thunberg and others were, the Gaza aid flotilla that was trying to break the siege, was carrying infant formula. So had it been able to get through, maybe these children would be alive today. All right, next up here, this one is just really wild, is maybe the only way to describe it. Donald Trump demands Israel pardon Benjamin Netanyahu. So I wrote this one for JudgeSnap.com. In a rambling post on his Truth Social, President Donald Trump praised Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and demanded Tel Aviv give its leader a pardon. I'm going to read the majority of this statement here. I think it's important to read this statement and for everybody to hear it. I would go read it yourself. I did cut just a little bit of it because it's very long and rambling, and it gets almost like tedious to read the whole thing. But I do worry that this is maybe a little bit of an insight into the mind right now of the commander-in-chief of the U.S. So Trump writes, breaking news. I was shocked to hear the state of Israel, which has just had one of its greatest moments in history and strongly led by Bibi Netanyahu, is continuing its ridiculous witch hunt against their great wartime prime minister. Bibi and I just went through hell together, fighting a very tough and brilliant longtime enemy of Israel, Iran, and Bibi could not have been better, sharper, or stronger in his love for the incredible Holy Land. We are fighting, literally, for the survival of Israel, and there's nobody in Israel's history has fought harder or more completely than Bibi Netanyahu. Despite all this, I just learned Bibi has been summoned to the court on Monday for the continuation of this long running. He has been going through this horror show since May of 2020, unheard of. This is the first time a sitting prime minister has ever been on trial. Politically motivated case concerning cigars, a Bugs Bunny doll, and numerous other unfair charges in order to do him great harm. Such a witch hunt for a man who has been given so much is unthinkable to me. He deserves better than this, and so does the state of Israel. Bibi Netanyahu's trial should be canceled immediately, or a pardon given to him, to a great hero who has done so much for the state. Perhaps there is no one that I know who could have worked in a better harmony with the President of the United States, me, then Bibi Netanyahu. It was the United States of America that saved Israel, and now it's going to be the United States of America that saves Bibi Netanyahu. This travesty of justice cannot be allowed. Now, a couple things in here. Netanyahu and his wife are facing multiple corruption charges, at least hundreds of thousands of dollars, and media manipulation and other things that I don't know if I should say that he is certainly guilty of, but reviewing the evidence would lead one to believe that. And he has attempted to implement judicial reforms in Israel to avert these charges. And in 2023, a massive protest movement stalled the reforms, and those protests only ended with the October 7th, 2023 Hamas attack. The Israeli leader thanked President Donald Trump for his support in a post on X. "Thank you, Trump. I was deeply moved by your heartfelt support for me and your incredible support for Israel and the Jewish people. I look forward to continue working with you to defeat our common enemies, liberate our hostages, and quickly expand the circle of peace." So Netanyahu has invoked Israel's ongoing wars in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Iran as a cause to delay his trial. In March, he ordered the breaking of a ceasefire and hostage exchange with Hamas just days before his trial was set to resume, leading to further delays. Netanyahu's lawyer argued that the recent regional and global developments should further delay the trial, and it does seem that he's gotten another delay thanks to his attacks on Iran. And it is notable because one of the things that Donald Trump says in there, that no Israeli prime minister has gone through this before, but former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert resigned amid corruption investigation in 2009, and he was later convicted of both breach of trust and bribery, and so not quite so unheard of President Trump. So, I thought this post, as well as some other things that Donald Trump has said in recent days, would raise serious alarms and questions about the mental fitness of the United States president. And apparently, I will probably cover this on Monday's show. He now has another one about Iran, making some threats against the Ayatollah. Moving on here, 3 Palestinians killed during Israeli settler rampage in occupied West Bank town. I think this is important to note that, Israel's forces are stretched thin. And so it seems in the West Bank, to carry out their annexation and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians there, Israel is increasingly relying on these Jewish settlers to just go on rampages, killing Palestinians in hopes of driving entire families and villages away. So on Wednesday night, Jewish settlers attacked the town of Kaf Malalik, east of Ramallah, in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, resulting in the killing of 3 Palestinians by the Israeli military. According to the Palestinian news agency Wafa, dozens of settlers rampaged through the town, setting homes and cars on fire as residents from the town and neighboring villages attempted to confront them. Local sources told Al Jazeera that Israeli military provided protection for the settlers and fired on the Palestinian residents. And so imagine being able to go into somebody's town, go into somebody's home, and start throwing things at their house, maybe trying to set it on fire. And then when they come out to defend their property, the police shoot you. That's the situation right now in the West Bank. All right. This article I wrote for the Institute on June 26th. Symbolic Iran missile attack on U.S. base required largest Patriot engagement to repel. So even after Tehran informed Washington that Iran would execute a symbolic retaliatory strike on the Al Udeid air base in Qatar, the U.S. military had to engage in its largest battle using Patriot missiles to date to repel the attack. On Monday, Iran fired 19 ballistic missiles at America's largest Middle East air base. Most of the missiles were shot down by air defenses, with Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Crane, telling reporters, "We believe this is the largest single engagement in U.S. Patriot engagement in U.S. military history, and we were joined in this engagement by Qatari Patriot crews." While General King did not disclose how many interceptors were fired, it was likely an expensive operation, as each PAC-3 Patriot missile cost $4 million. Additionally, the supply of air defenses is becoming increasingly limited due to the ongoing wars in the Middle East and Ukraine. Secretary of State Marco Rubio told the Senate in May, the Ukrainians have asked for air defense systems, the Patriot system, which frankly we don't have. And so this is just an insight into how limited the supplies are. After Israel launched its aggressive war against Iran, Tel Aviv's supply of interceptors quickly dwindled. Within 5 days of the start of the war, multiple outlets reported Tel Aviv was nearly out of Arrow 3 interceptors and only had supplies to operate the Iron Dome air defense system for less than 2 weeks. By the end of the short war, Israel was forced to ration its deployment of interceptors, leaving some areas vulnerable to Iranian strikes. After the war, President Donald Trump noted, Iran hit Israel hard. Through the 12-day conflict, the U.S. aided Israel in shooting down incoming Iranian missiles. The assistance put a strain on the Navy's supply of interceptors. Admiral James Kilby, the acting director of naval operations, said while the U.S. had enough SM-3 interceptors, they were being used at an alarming rate to defend Israel. The SM-3 can cost between $10 and $30 million for a single missile, which just goes to show how much the U.S. is spending to help Israel at this point. All right, so Iran's foreign minister says no plans to restart talks with the U.S. despite Trump's claims. So this is being made to be a big deal by the U.S. side that, oh, look, we've beaten Iran and now they're crawling back to the negotiating table. They're willing to agree to everything. And my guess is that's not what the Iranians are doing. We're, I think, going to see more details and information from this story unfold over the weekend. And we also have the Iranian Ayatollah giving his first statement since the ceasefire was put in place, saying that Iran will never surrender to the U.S., and my guess is that's very close to Iran's position. Last up here, just wanted to note this, U.S. launches its 43rd airstrike in Somalia this year. This is important to remember that while we have a lot of wars going on around the world, there is also a war going on in Somalia. And just like Trump did during his first administration, he really ramped it up. There's just so little known about this conflict that it's very hard to cover. But my guess is that far more innocent civilians are being killed than the American government is admitting to. All right, everybody, that's where I'm wrapping it up for the week. Thanks so much for all of your support, not only on conflicts of interest, but in reading my articles, reposting my articles, sharing what I'm posting on Twitter, and maybe most importantly, your support for the Kyle Anzalone Show. I will be back with more news to cover next week. Maybe a little bit of good news, but probably most of it's going to be bad again. Thanks, everyone.